Hey everybody, it's Dave here, Darren over there. We're your two old bloggers, been commenting publicly on the Minnesota Vikings for over 2 decades apiece, and we're going to continue today this Sunday. First off, I want to say hello to everybody that's in the chat already. Dr. Proto, My Worthless Opinion, Jonathan, Davy Chains, Mary, Raymond, you guys all absolutely rock. And of course, Dan Henneman was the first to get there. Way to go. I want to extend, first off, a congratulations to Miss Mary. Her granddaughter was part of the Patriots softball team, first ever sanctioned to win the South Dakota State Championship yesterday. Way to go, Mary! And now we're off to the show. The big show where we're going to talk about 3 themes. The first one, Vikings OTAs, the developments we've seen there, and more. Second theme, we are looking at Kwesi Adofo-Mensah is taking steps to make that personnel department in his image. We knew he sat there with Rick Spielman's guys early last year, and he's slowly been making changes, and Darren has some updates on that. And then for the third theme, we have our rookie spotlight. This time it's Jaquelin Roy, that defensive lineman from LSU. All next on Two Old Bloggers. Vikings First and SKOL presents This Week in Vikings Land with Darren and Dave, your two old bloggers. And we're back. It's Dave here, Darren over there. How are things in the Great White North? Darren, have the fires stopped yet?
They have not, Dave, but still some heavy-duty ones, and there's one real big one well south of where I live, but it's caused a community to be evacuated earlier this week. About a very tiny community, only 100 people. I don't know if people wouldn't realize it, but and they had to fly everybody out of it because this community it doesn't have year-round road access. It only has a road during the winter. So during the spring and summer and fall, you got to fly in or boat in to this place. Anyway, not a great situation there, but that's the summer we're going to have. Hopefully it doesn't result in any more communities evacuated.
Yep, I agree.
Including the one I live in.
I agree. Hey, want to welcome a couple more people. Yogi, Purple Rain 24/7 is here, and Norse Fee Us is also here. Sorry, buddy, I gotta say it slowly, but it sounds like an Egyptian god. Norspheus, god of thunder, god of purple. All right, let's get this sucker started. We'll move to the other screen. And as we named it, Vikings OTA developments. And I didn't really have a good picture to put up there, so I put up something I liked looking at.
Hey, no complaints from this side, Dave.
And there he is, Justin Day's joined us. Welcome. That brings us to theme 1. Where we're going to talk about OTAs.
Organized team activities, Dave. Yes, the Vikings had rolled with another one this week, and the media, as they did the week before, they were let in on one day, which allowed folks like ourselves to hear some write-ups, get some reports, see some tweets from the various beat writers who noticed some things, and it gives us an idea maybe what to look for in training camp, in preseason, on what roles certain players are going to have with the Vikings in 2023, and what players might not have a role in 2023 that we thought they might have one. So I think it's a little bit of intel. You don't really know how much to take from it because it is OTAs, and maybe the Vikings are being super sleuthy and showing things when the media is there that they don't even plan on using, just to throw teams off the scent. I don't know, but they're trying things, and I think the first thing that I found interesting of a note was my favorite topic now, Dave. Now that Irv Smith Jr. is gone, is cornerbacks, and we learned that, at least based on the day the media was in, the top two corners now appear to be Akayleb Evans, the second-year guy from Missouri, and Byron Murphy, the junior. A bit noteworthy there. What's noteworthy there is that, Dave, I don't care who plays well at corner, who's ever starting. I just want somebody to play well at corner. But a bit surprised that what that indicates is that Andrew Booth Jr. is not one of the top two, or maybe he's not even one of the top three at this point, which is a bit surprising at this point to me, and a little bit disappointing because, of course, Booth Jr. was the Vikings' second-round draft pick. Their first second-round draft pick. Ed Ingram was the other. He was their second pick of Kwesi Adofo-Mensah's first draft. He was making a name for himself early in training camp, playing physical. Getting in fights with Amir Smith-Marset all the time. Things looked good. And then he just couldn't stay healthy. He got hurt in training camp as well as early in the regular season. And Akayleb Evans leapfrogged him on the depth chart. And now we're several months past that. Andrew Booth Jr. should be pretty healthy as he's been in a while. And it looks like he still hasn't beaten Akayleb Evans on the depth chart. And, Akayleb Evans was picked 2 rounds later than Andrew Booth Jr., was never considered to be a first-round draft pick like Andrew Booth Jr. was. So, I was hoping that Andrew Booth Jr. could really take things by the reins here and really carve out a substantial role for himself with the Vikings in that secondary in 2023. There's still time to do it, but at least right now it doesn't look like he's been able to do that. And that's, I think, noteworthy. And as I say, I'm a bit disappointed to hear that Booth Jr. has not ascended to being at least being the number 2 guy opposite Byron Murphy Jr. right at this moment. I don't know how you feel about that yourself, or whether you're worried at all. But interesting.
Well, we'll get into it when we start talking the wide receivers here in a bit. But the same principle applies. I want the best player playing. If Evans overtakes Booth, and like he seemed to last year, and he stays ahead of Booth, he's earned it. Let him play.
Yeah.
And that applies to all positions. Let the best guy play, regardless of draft position. And then he gets back to, well, what did they miss, on the scouting portion of it? Why did they have Booth higher than Evans? If Evans has made the bigger leap quicker, etc., what are they missing? And it may be that they both turn out to be fantastic, and we have great depth. We were wondering, we don't have enough corners. No, there's not enough corners. Oh, no. We're preaching it all in the offseason. But now we have Evans, who seems to have grasped that starting position as of OTAs. Booth, we have Blackman, who we just drafted, who has a chance. And it's just like, okay, good. Which one's going to play better? I want them to do that.
Yeah, for sure. The Vikings haven't really had a great track record in the past decade or so in picking cornerbacks. We know that. Xavier Rhodes has been the only guy that ever amounted to much.
And it took Zim babysitting him to get him to the level where he was that good. So it's an interesting position. All of them are, but it's an interesting position to where you've got to be able to hit it right and develop it right. Right? There's certain key things in the player's mind, right, on how he reacts and how he does things that are going to equate to success. And can they spot that in the pre-draft process when they're scouting, or is it afterwards, or is there a key? Some kids growing up develop later than others, right? Some boy may be 6 foot tall and in sixth grade, right? And he's all for playing football. Another one may be 5'9", right? The kid that's 6 foot tall may max out at 6'1", but the 5'9" one suddenly gets a growth spurt as a senior and goes to 6'5", right? It's how they spot that, when the developmental curve is, which I think is fascinating, and we'll get into it in the second thing when we talk about the personnel department, how, some things that they look at may play into that, but it's going to be interesting.
So talked a bit about the corners there, Dave, and like who looks like they're 1 and 2 in the pecking order right now for the Vikings. Another interesting tweet which you sent to me was that when the Vikings, in the section that the media had, thank you, Jordan, in the portion that the media got to watch, that they said when the Vikings rolled out 3 safety looks, that those 3 safeties that they used were Cam Bynum, Harrison Smith, and then the guy here, Josh Metellus. And Metellus was working in the slot. I find that interesting because when Metellus got drafted, A, I wasn't really sure if he'd make the team, right. And B, he was considered coverage was not considered his forte. He was a guy who could hit, but his coverage was considered to be a low. And so I think very interesting. We've talked about him a bit in the offseason as well, how he played really well last year when he did play, which wasn't a lot, but when he did, he seemed to play well. And I just find it interesting that now the Vikings seem to be trusting, or at least they're trying him in a slot role in 3 safety looks, covering shifty, quick inside wide receivers. So interesting that the Vikings and Brian Flores in general seem to be trusting Josh Metellus to do that. The other thing about that is Lewis Cine was not one of those 3 guys in those 3 safety looks, which I think is also interesting because we talked about him a couple of weeks ago, about how he was all juiced about the Brian Flores defense, about how aggressive it was, all out malice, all that stuff. And I was really looking forward to saying, yeah, I like what I'm hearing from Lewis. Let's see him do it on the field. Well, come on, Lewis. It's still early and everything, but now is the time for you got to start showing why the Vikings drafted you 32nd overall in the 2022 draft. Get going, start getting unseating a guy like Josh Metellus, unseating a guy like Cam Bynum, 2 guys that have a much lower draft slot than you did, and do not have the athleticism that you do. It's time for Lewis Cine, I think, to start showing stuff. And again, I'm not full-blown concerned about this, but I'd like to see Lewis Cine start to pop up and get his name mentioned for doing some of those things that we saw him do at Georgia.
Mm-hmm. Well, I agree with the Cine take on that. Not only was Metellus brought into the slot, they also moved Bynum into the slot on a few of those practice reps as well. So
you've been asking about that. You've been asking for that for several months, Dave.
Yeah, I think it'll be perfect. But I think what it's happening, I think Flores is going, all right, guys, I'm going to be having you play multiple positions based on what you guys can do. And I think here in the OTAs, they're going, all right, Metellus, your turn. Get up there. Let's see how you do in the slot. It'd be nice to say, hey, I'm going to put you on JJ. JJ's lying up. I'm in that position. Obviously, that's not happening, but I'm going to put you on, KJ. Now you got to track and follow KJ, or you got to track and follow one of our tight ends. Let's see how you do. And their OTAs, I think, are the beginning of an evaluation process. But it's good to see that he's willing to do that, because if we are weak on the outside at corner, and maybe our best nickel guy is a safety versus our best nickel guy being a 3rd corner or 4th corner, I think that's a really good strategy, and I like that they're doing it. I think it is. I like the idea. Let's see how they implement it, but I like the idea.
And it's worked well for other teams. Like Zimmer was the guy that I don't know if he started the big nickel, but he was running J-Ron Curse in the big nickel three seasons ago, and then Curse has gone on to do that on other stops and has actually carved out a pretty nice career for himself. Not with the Vikings.
Yeah. and he's become actually a really good safety. So
yes.
for Dallas, for those that don't know.
So another note. Yeah, so we got corners, safeties. Another name that's been coming up on the offensive side of things has been Jalen Nailor. Has been mentioned in multiple
Big time.
stories that I've seen about the both OTAs. About he's been the guy who's been the busiest wide receiver, catching the most passes of any wide receiver there. Mind you, Jefferson, JJ is not there, but
Right.
Jalen Nailor is showing up at these OTAs, and which is interesting to me because I thought last year, very small sample size, but those 2 games he played against Green Bay and then Chicago on the season ender, when he got to play, he looked really effective to me. He looked very comfortable. I looked like a kid who had a little bit of something. The only thing about that is that I thought the same thing about Amir Smith-Marset the season before, late in the season, and then he ended up getting cut by the Vikings, and so it's OTAs. You can't run a lot in. You can't always read a lot into it, but to me, Naylor's a guy that I'm going to be watching out for. I think other Viking fans should watch for him during training camp, preseason, because he's going to get a lot of work in preseason. And I don't think he's going to take the number 3 wide receiver role from KJ Osborn, but if he can show enough development that perhaps the Vikings, Kevin O'Connell and Phillips, they feel comfortable next offseason because KJ Osborn is a free agent after this year. Maybe they feel dollars and cents wise, the Vikings could still be up with it on the cap a little bit, that they'll feel comfortable with letting KJ Osborn go and giving Jalen Nailor the number 3 role. And that's assuming Jordan Addison does what we expect Jordan Addison to do too, and be the number 2 guy behind Justin Jefferson. But I feel that it's noteworthy that Nailor is getting mentioned a lot and showing up and making plays at OTAs, even though, again, they're not in pads. Nobody's hitting anybody yet, but still, it's better. I like it a lot more when I hear a guy, even in the OTAs, is making plays and impressing than not to hear anything about him at all.
Oh, without a doubt. KJ Osborn, I haven't heard anything negative so far. I think he's doing great too. And
yep, absolutely.
So it'd be interesting to see if Nailor works his way into the wide receiver 3 or 2. Hey, we haven't seen much of Addison. We saw him rookie minicamp, and that was just the rookies running around in shorts. I want to see him out there. And obviously, he's nursing a strained hamstring. So,
and like we've said at multiple positions, Dave, not enough depth on the Vikings. So, God forbid there's an injury to somebody like Osborn or Addison. And I'm not going to mention the other guy's name because I don't even want to mention injury and the guy that's with JJ. But
no.
You could, but if Osborn or Addison misses a little bit of time, hey, you could, if Nailor can step in there and you don't really miss a beat, he could give us that depth. So good to hear that he's doing what he's doing in OTAs. Final thing we want to get to is Justin Jefferson, of course, not at OTAs, and that's going to make a lot of noise. That's going to get noticed. It has been noticed. Kevin O'Connell was asked about it. He's not worried, and he shouldn't be, because, listen, Justin Jefferson, I'm 100% sure, is going to be at training camp, and he's going to be playing in 2023. There'll be no holdout or anything like that. But this kind of gets back to what we talked about a few months back, just when the season ended, Dave, about how, yeah, Justin Jefferson is under contract for 2 more years. But much like what happened with Dalvin Cook and his coming into his 4th season, I didn't feel that Jefferson was going to step on into the Vikings facility until he got his contract situation worked out. And it's looking like that is going to be the case. I know he said at the end of the season that, he doesn't care about money, and if they want me to be here, I'll be here. Well, the Vikings want him to be here. But, his management, if Justin Jefferson and his management team, they've got to be looking at it this way. And I think it's a smart way to look at it, is that, look, hey, Justin Jefferson is, like, right now, he's the 10th highest paid Viking on the roster. His contract is 65th ranked amongst all NFL wide receivers. This is a guy who has given the Vikings like Pro Bowl, Hall of Fame production his first 3 years. and his salary cap hit has been no higher than 1.8 million in those 3 years. So he's smelling a Tyreek Hill type payday and better.
Mhm.
But if he gets injured in OTAs or in anything before he gets that payday, he's not going to see that payday, or it's going to be delayed and
And
less
reduced, yeah.
than, yeah, then because he's going to be on a prove it, you're not going to get injured again type thing. So if I'm him, I'm like, I need to cash in now and make sure that that does not happen. Secure my financial future. So I think that that's what's happening here. I think that that's a legitimate thing for Justin Jefferson to do. It's been done by many players in the past. Dalvin Cook did it, and he knows, and his representatives know that the Vikings are not going to go into 2023 without Justin Jefferson on the field and happy with his contract situation. So now they've got a lot to work out because they've only got so many dollars, and there's Danielle Hunter to deal with, and you still got to fix the Dalvin Cook thing, and all of that come out in the wash. But they've got a lot to work with. But that has to be settled. I'm pretty sure that Justin Jefferson is going to get a contract extension, and it's going to happen before training camp hits, so that we don't have to worry about it. But it is causing a little bit of concern amongst Viking fans because you don't want to be missing team billing time, and there's will he be in sync with everybody and all that sort of stuff. I think he'll be fine, but hey, for him, you got to get the contract situation settled, get that extension, get it at the amount of years that you want for the dollar figure that you want, or else,
Mhm.
and the Vikings are going to do that, but it's going to take some working and talk between both sides, and that's going to take some time.
Well, and as I reported earlier in the week, from everything I've read, the numbers have been basically hashed out there in agreement. They're working on the sticking points of the contract of guarantees, what is guaranteed, injury guarantees and that guarantees and stuff like that. And I'm pretty sure once they get that squared away, it's going to happen. Now, some of it may hinge on what happens with Dalvin Cook and the money they free up, because they do have to keep money in reserve for rainy day funds and stuff like that. But I'm suspecting we'll find out relatively soon, hopefully within the week, and so it'll be good. Yes, Davey, I'm drinking Fighting 69th today. And
Jeremy was
just
talking about talking about depth at inside linebacker, I believe, which is a good topic, I think, for next week. I
mm-hmm.
don't know if we'll get to hit on it today, but
Next week
certainly
will be a
something
good
to
one.
talk about. Yeah.
So good, good, good. All right, that brings us to theme 2. This is something you and I talk about, have been for the last 2 years offline, is how is Kwesi going to make the scouting department and the analytics room and all that stuff, how is he going to make it himself? And how are we going to see as fans signs of that change? Because a lot of the back office guys, we don't hear squat about, right? You wanted a bunch of pictures for me to do for this segment. I can't find them. They don't exist, right? Because these are people, they're great people. They work for the organization. They're part of the team working for that one goal, to hold up that Vince Lombardi. But you never hear their names. You don't see them. They're not big names in the NFL unless they're way high up. And it's hard to evaluate. But you've tracked down some of this information. So let's go over it.
Yeah, well, Dave, when Kwesi Adofo-Mensah got hired as our new general manager, back in late January of 2022, yeah, this was one of the several things that you and I were like, I don't know if looking forward to is the right
Mm-hmm.
way of putting it, but curious about how it would all shake out. Was that how is Kwesi Adofo-Mensah going to shake up the Vikings scouting department and their player personnel department? Because one of the one of the criticisms about Rick Spielman was that, I don't know if maybe it was all drafts, but one of the criticisms was that he had too many swings and misses, particularly on the draft picks that he took. and that was one of the reasons why the Vikings often had to dip into free agency a lot more than maybe you would like, and also why they got into situations with maybe not fantastic contract offers for veterans and that sort of thing. And so the hope was that Kwesi Adofo-Mensah, when he gets in, he's going to change up the scouting department and pro player personnel department. And so there are not as many swings and misses in the draft, and that the Vikings get more consistent in getting good, solid players and Pro Bowl and Hall of Fame players too. And I think I expected that there might be a bit of a bloodletting in the personnel and the scouting department. And as it turned out, though, is that the first thing that Kwesi Adofo-Mensah did was he hired Ryan Gregson, who was kind of like in a baseball analogy, he was kind of like a bench coach for Kwesi Adofo-Mensah, I think, because he was a former GM with the Indianapolis Colts. Kwesi, this was his first time as a GM at the NFL level. So having Gregson there was a good sounding board for him, even though you may not like how good of a job Gregson did in Indianapolis, but nonetheless, that was the guy that Kwesi picked, and he was kind of one of the first new guys. But last June, the Vikings put out a press release, finalizing their player personnel and scouting and player personnel department. And what was interesting is when I looked at it, is that they only had in that list, they only had 2 new hires compared to like what would already been there. And the 2 new hires were Donovan Jackson, who was a pro scout, and then David Williams, a national scout. They had 4 guys who got promotions, and they had 13 guys who got updated titles, including Spielman holdovers, Ryan Monans, and Jamal Stevenson. So if you look at that, you're like, what the heck, Kwesi? You're bringing back a lot of Rick's guys. Like, how are you expecting things to be different? But I think that, part of that was it. When I look back at it now, it makes sense because Kwesi Adofo-Mensah, again, just new organization. It's probably makes sense to keep a lot of those guys because most of them, the vast majority, are probably very, very good at what they do. That's why they got to the NFL and got hired at that level. Even though they've got relationships with Rick Spielman, right. But that doesn't mean that they're not competent in what they're doing. But they also knew, those guys would know the players that were already on the Vikings roster a lot better than Kwesi Adofo-Mensah did. And also the whole scouting process, how the Vikings looked at players in the past and what they evaluated in the past. So that, I think that gave Kwesi Adofo-Mensah gave him familiarity, some intel on how the Vikings looked at player procurement in the past, and to see whether that meshed with how he looks at player evaluation and player procurement. But so that made sense. The other thing is that, of course, Kwesi might want to bring in this guy and that scout, but some of those guys maybe don't want to move to Minnesota, so you can't get them, or they're not allowed to move to Minnesota by their team. So you can't always get what you want. But slowly, I think there have been some changes that have been made, and we looked about just recently a couple of one long-time Spielman Rick guy, Scott Kuhn, left the organization over a week ago, and Chris Blanco, who had been with the team since 2021, they also left. So notable because Kuhn had been brought. He'd worked with Rick Spielman in Miami, had been brought over in 2007. So he was a long time Minnesota Viking.
Yeah, he was there longer than Spielman.
Player personnel guy. And he was actually like the analytics head honcho for Kwesi. I forget what his title was at the time. But anyway, those 2 have parted ways with Kwesi Adofo-Mensah. It doesn't sound to me like it was it sounded to me like they were let go. It wasn't a case of they moved on so much. So there's a little bit of slow turnover there with the guys at Rick's guys. And then this Thursday, he added a couple of new guys. He added Matt DeLuca, who is now, Sam DeLuca, who's assistant director of pro personnel now, and also Matt Kelly, who's a West area scout listed. So a couple of new guys. DeLuca, interesting because he's actually a Kwesi guy, I think. He worked with Kwesi in Cleveland, so they've got a relationship there. The Matt Kelly one is a bit interesting too because Matt Kelly had been the Senior Bowl. He'd been involved in the Senior Bowl as their director of football operations.
Hmm.
And what we've seen in the 2 drafts so far with Kwesi Adofo-Mensah is that he has picked, I think, 10 of our 16 draft picks have been players that went to the Senior Bowl or the East West
East-West
Shrine Bowl.
Shrine.
Most of them have been from the Senior Bowl. So I think this is interesting because one of Matt Kelly's jobs, I think, was identifying talent to come to the Senior Bowl. And Kwesi Adofo-Mensah has called a lot of his draft picks from the Senior Bowl. So I think he's liking what Matt Kelly's seeing in the players and feels that there's a good synergy there. So interesting, I think, hire there with Matt Kelly. And I think more and more now, we've seen the little bit of movement now. I think as the months go on, you're going to see even more movement with the scouting department and the player personnel department with the Vikings. Kwesi bringing in more his guys that he likes, that think the way he thinks about scouting players, about assessing players, about evaluating players. And that I think that movement will happen even more if the Vikings draft halls don't improve. You know what I mean? Because the 2020 Kwesi's first draft in 2022, it's early, but the returns have not been very good on that so far. A long way to go, but there could be,
and most of that due to injuries, but even with Lewis not being able to take a starting spot, and the Booth and Evans and stuff like that, they dealt with issues last year, and the only starter being Ed Ingram. That's
and not great, but I think that get ready. This is something that you and I think will keep on tracking to see what movement there is in the Vikings scouting department, in the player personnel department, to see again who's Kwesi moving in that's different, that are his guys, and moving out the Rick Spielman holdovers. I think though Paul Wiggin will always stay on on the front office. It won't matter.
And we do know Kwesi uses analytics. He is best friends with Mr. Eric Eager, who's now with Sumer Sports. And he very much likes a lot of the guys down at PFF. It is going to be interesting how he puts his, little mark on everything. Whereas Spielman and a lot of the analytics, they were looking for personality traits, type psychological things.
Right.
And they both play a factor. It's not just got to go with the numbers because the numbers never lie. Well, no, the numbers don't tell you the whole picture, right? The numbers tell you part of the picture. There's other parts of the pictures that you've got to look at to assemble the whole, to see the portrait that they're trying to paint of a championship team or a championship Hall of Fame player like Justin Jefferson or whatever, right? You've got to be able to focus, and we'll see the growth. Can he do that? Can he assemble a team that focuses on all those different points and brings them together, and so they can build a Super Bowl winning team?
And right now, with Kuhn gone from the Vikings, actually in the front office hierarchy, which you can see on the Minnesota Vikings website, the team website, is that they're down one analytics guy because Kuhn was the head of that. They had 2 guys under him, and now they've just had those 2 guys and no replacement for Kuhn yet. So if that'll be the next thing, is to see who replaces Kuhn in that pecking order. Is it somebody that they already have, or is it somebody new that Kwesi's going to bring in?
Yeah, it's going to be interesting. I find it fascinating. We both have. That's why Darren and I talk about it offline. It's not generally a show topic because you're getting into the things we can't even see, type deal. We're speculating here on a lot of it, but we look for those itty-bitty clues, what happens. And thanks for bringing it to us this week.
One thing that I didn't do and didn't have time to do is go through the other front offices, the other websites, to see how they listed it and see how many analytics positions like the Browns have compared to the Vikings, or the Packers have compared to the Vikings, just to kind of see how much of at least staff wise, how much of an emphasis is each team putting on the analytics side of thing, as opposed to the old bird dog scout, that's just going around from city to city and town to town and
chopping on a cigar, and he's got his newspaper and notes, and he's writing down, this guy's a tough guy. He eats snails for breakfast. He'll make a great player.
Yeah.
Yep, exactly. Well, cool. Like, again, it's a fascinating subject. Thank you for bringing it up today. And now we're on to theme 3. We are continuing our rookie focus, where we're going to pick a rookie every week running up to the season to focus on. And this week, it's Jaquelin Roy from LSU.
I've seen his name pronounced a whole bunch of ways.
Until I hear him say it, but everybody's saying it's Jaquelin
Yeah,
versus
I'll go with
Jacqueline.
that.
But
Yeah, it ain't Jacqueline. I know that. I haven't heard that one say. I think maybe the only one who said that was me.
we had a guest on it. We had one of our podcast only specials, Scoling with Friends. I had on the New Orleans Saints owner of their affiliate site. Well, he's also a big LSU fan. And I asked him, and he goes, Jacqueline.
Mm-hmm.
So,
anyway.
I don't know. But, he runs the Saints organization, so you got to expect something like that, I guess.
So Jaquelin Roy, the 101st pick in the draft in the 5th round, went to the Vikings. And I wanted to dive into him. He's the 3rd Viking draftee that we've profiled here so far on 2-0 bloggers. So wanted to dive into him a bit because we knew defensive line was a need, Dave, but maybe not like a top tier need for the Vikings, not like cornerback, not maybe like wide receiver. And so the Vikings did end up drafting Jaquelin Roy, but they drafted him on day 3. But here's a kid that even though he came out early, he's a junior. He's got a ton of tape on him. He played over 30 games at LSU as part of a defensive line rotation on a pretty deep LSU defense. Last year was his first year as a starter for the Tigers, so he was one of their top dogs, I think. So a lot of tape on him for all teams to look at that you could assess, evaluate, and all that sort of thing. I think for Jaquelin Roy, some of the pros that in a couple of the games, the highlights, not highlights, actually the full snaps that he played, a couple of games that I was able to watch on YouTube, was that the first thing, this doesn't seem like a big deal, Dave, and maybe you'd think every player should have this, but like Jaquelin Roy is a high motor hustle guy. Like he plays to the whistle and beyond. He plays hard every snap, every down that he's on there. And he played a lot of snaps for LSU last year. And I think that, again, you would think that would be something that every player should do, but they don't. And I find that a lot of big offensive linemen, a lot of big defensive linemen, the big round bellies, like you like to call them, a lot of times they only tend to play when they think, as long as they have a job to do, as long as they think the play is around them. And once that they feel that is over, they quit. And what the problem is, a lot of times the play is not over. Right. You don't have that problem with Jaquelin Roy. And in fact, because he keeps moving, because he keeps hustling, he sometimes falls into plays because the effort, he kept on pursuing the play, and somebody else who should have made the play didn't. He ends up having to make the play.
And catching it from the backside.
Yep. Yes. Which is pretty impressive for a guy who weighed in at 305 pounds or whatever it was and played a lot of nose tackle at LSU. So I really like that. When you got effort from a player, that's one less thing you have to worry about because Roy is an ascending talent. That was one reason I really liked the pick when it was made. I liked it that we got an ascending talent in the 5th round like we did. I think another thing that's really a plus for him is that even though he weighed over 300 pounds and he's playing the nose, he's a very athletic, quick, and fluid athlete for his size. So he can penetrate gaps. If he wins off the snap, he can penetrate gaps and cause a lot of problems on running plays just because he's got that fluidity, because he's got that quickness about him, and he can fit into tight spaces and get penetration, which is something that big guys can't always do because they're so damn big. Another thing with Jaquelin Roy that it stands out is that a lot of great upper body strength. Like he can
Hmm.
club a guy, an offensive lineman, and stun them and get them off balance when he does it right. And one thing that I'm kind of learning a little bit, but one thing that he also does well is he's good at he's because of that upper body strength, he's good at extending an arm, whether it's left or
Hmm.
right, holding off an offensive lineman, and then seeing where the play is going, and then pushing them off and shooting a gap and making that play. Some players, again, can't do that because they just don't have that strength. Jaquelin Roy has that strength, and he can do that, and he does it a lot.
Well, and you're
Um,
thinking they're going against guys that are 300 pounds too, right? In the
yes,
guards and such. And
and
as
double
we know on the
teams.
offensive side of the ball, that holding the arm out, and if you can keep the guy under control out there, that's a good thing. You're not letting him get into your body. And if you're not letting you get into your body, you tend to have more freedom to move and make moves. So it's very much a good trait to have as a big defensive lineman.
The one last thing that kind of I noticed was that it's a little, it seems like a little thing, but it isn't when you're fighting into the tight quarters like he does inside. But he's got a good way with his hands sometimes. Like he's good at slapping or slipping
Right.
when offensive linemen reach out to block him, and that allows him to like scoot by them and again get pressure up the middle on the quarterback or penetrate and blow up a running play. That was just something I noticed. I don't know what you'd call those kind of hand moves,
Well,
but he's good at
hand
that.
fighting.
Yeah,
It's because, all right, take an offensive lineman. If an offensive lineman goes back and sets, and he's like this, and he keeps his arms relatively here, he's going to wait until the guy gets in, and then he wants to punch him in the chest, right? He
yeah,
wants to stun him back. Well, if that offensive lineman shoots that arm out too early, or in the process of, and that defender comes across and then sweeps it, right, and pulls it across his body, you can see it twists him.
yeah,
And if it twists him, his balance may not be good enough to come back around, or strength good enough to come back around because it's momentum. And then he can go by on the opposite side, or he can continue with that and then rotate in. And there's a battle between offensive linemen and defensive linemen who punches, who puts out the hands first, and then who controls those hands. And the winner of that generally wins the rep.
hmm
So that's a
and
good
yeah,
thing.
yeah.
If he can do that, that's a good thing. It's hard to teach.
I would call like, yeah, Roy seems to be good at slipping and slapping on those with his
Good.
hands. And the So those are I think the pros to Jaquelin Roy. The cons, I think, and I think this is a big one, and you'll read it in every scouting report on him, and it also showed up in the games that I watched. Is that he plays too high at times, and that causes him, and he also gives a lot of ground, like a yard or two. He doesn't
Mm-hmm.
on When blockers get into him, they can push him back a yard or two, which I think is very concerning because again, he's playing on the inside. He was playing nose, so he's supposed to be an anchor. And a lot of times in the games I saw, he did not anchor all that well, which means that particularly if he doesn't get that cleaned up as a pro, um, as a rookie and going forward, I don't think that Jaquelin Roy is going to be. He's going to have to be a guy that you can only really play on pass rushing downs because he can't anchor. He's going to be a liability as a run defender, um, which I don't like. But I
At
think that that's something that can
nose.
be, yeah. But I think that's something that can be taught and coached out of him.
Well, most definitely. And it's leverage and keeping low and stuff like that. But you talk about him at nose. See, that's where you and I disagree. I think him put on the slide. I think he's going to be more of a three tech in the
Mm-hmm.
nose. So we'll get it. We'll talk about that here momentarily. You wanted to say next, I believe, we have this big boy.
We do.
Do you think he's backing him up at nose, or will be complimentary on the side of him?
Well, to me, he seems, just looking at his physique, and maybe he'll put on weight, but even though he's 305 pounds, he doesn't look like a big round belly,
Mm-hmm.
like a big typical Pat Williams kind of run stuffer or a Harrison Phillips. to me, he kind of looks like a guy that would be on the side of the nose tackle, not your actual nose tackle. And that's where I see him. Like ESPN's depth chart right now, and they are often inaccurate, but they have him as a nose tackle behind Harrison Phillips and behind Kyrie's Tonga. I don't really see Jaquelin Roy being the guy behind those two. I think that he's more of a three tech or an end, a defensive tackle end for the Vikings in the 3-4 right now, which that's where I see him. But the fact is that wherever you look on the defensive line, though, Jaquelin Roy, he's got a shot if he plays well. There's not like an abundance of talent, like high end talent on the Vikings defensive line right now. I think we all have concerns about like how deep it is and how good the players that we all have on there already
is
are.
Lowry washed? We all
Yeah,
expect Lowry to come in and start, but is he old and
yes.
washed? And that's the perfect opportunity for one of these young guys to step up.
I mean, the best defensive lineman we had last year to me was Dalvin Tomlinson. Well, he's playing for the Browns now. So,
Mhm.
so I feel there's snaps to be had a lot at this unit for Jaquelin Roy. And if he shows in OTAs, if he shows in training camp, if he shows in the preseason in particular, he could have a substantial role for the Vikings. And I've heard a few scouts say that predicted that this guy's going to be starting for us by the end of the year. Well, it'd be fine with me if
Good.
he, like you said, if he's the best guy, and
Exactly.
by all means put him in there. But he's got some work to do. But again, he is a guy that when you read the scouting reports on him, everybody says like the more you watch this guy, the more you like how he plays. So again, I really liked the pick at the time, especially where we got him in the 5th round, which was about where he was expected to be picked, somewhere in the 4th, 5th. He's got talent. Didn't Not such a big deal in the 3-4 day, but I guess another concern would be that despite playing 3 years at LSU and getting a lot of snaps and being a starter last year, he only had 4 sacks in 3 seasons at LSU. And only a sack and a half a sack last year, despite playing a lot of snaps. So he creates pressure, but he doesn't always get home and seal the deal, which is okay if somebody else is cleaning up for him.
Is
But
cleaning up, yeah. You get the
but
DJ
if
Wanham types. Hey, I got 8 sacks last year. If
that's
he's
right.
the guy pushing the quarterback in the DJ Wanham, yes.
But yeah, I do. I mean, there are some concerns about how he'll hold up against the run, but I think that overall, where the Vikings got him, it's a pretty good pick, and he's got a chance to be a significant contributor to the Vikings defense. Maybe not in his rookie year, but year 2, year 3, year 4. I think that the one thing I wanted to close off this with is not so much about Jaquelin Roy, but just to talk about the Vikings defensive line in general. And the Vikings selected Jaquelin Roy in the 5th round.
Mm-hmm.
If you look at like when we talked about the defensive line last year, particularly when they moved to the 3-4, I think we expected that the defensive linemen, we wouldn't notice them as much as we did in Zimmer's 4-3 because the defensive ends are the guys getting all the sacks, and now
Right.
it's the edge linebackers that are going to do that. But the Vikings defensive lineman outside of Dalvin Tomlinson, you didn't really see him. Didn't seem like they made. Don't sleep on Calvin Alvery. Hey, I'll be happy to see the big fella, all 350 pounds of him. but if looking at the Vikings defensive line unit right now, if you didn't see him make a lot of plays last year, and I don't think you did, maybe that's not surprising when you look at where these guys that we've got were drafted at. Like there's again you've got Jaquelin Roy picked in the 5th round. Nobody on the defensive line right now, other than Ross Blacklock. Ross Blacklock is the only guy that was picked in the 2nd round or in the 2nd round, and we ended up getting him. Like the Texans ended up trading Blacklock for pennies on the dollar, right? So they were happy to get rid of him. Otherwise, we've got a bunch of guys who were picked in the 4th round, in the 5th round, in the 7th round. Jonathan Bullard, who you've got up there, he was picked in the 3rd round, but that was by the Bears like ages ago almost. So he wasn't even. I just feel that if the Vikings, if we as fans, if the organization itself wants game wreckers, if they want guys to make impact plays along the interior, at some point they're going to have to actually pick guys in premium draft positions at that position, and not pick guys in the 5th round all the time, or the 6th round, or the 7th round, or pick them up off the scrap heap from somebody else's team. That's just a comment that I wanted to make. If you want an Aaron Donald, you got to pick an Aaron Donald in the in the top, in the first round. Like over the past decade, the Vikings have picked, they picked a lot of corners, they picked a lot of wide receivers, they picked a lot of offensive linemen. We haven't picked anybody in the first round on defensive line, I think, since Kenichi Odeze in 2005.
Damn.
In the first round. That's a while.
When was Kevin Williams picked? What year?
He would have been. He was 2003, wasn't he?
3, right before Udeze.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and then we got lucky. I wouldn't say lucky, but you got Everson Griffin in the 4th. You got Brian Robeson in the 4th. You got Daniil Hunter in the 3rd. You got Ray Edwards in the 4th round. Right. So we got a lot of good guys later in the round. But we haven't invested a lot of premium draft positions on the defensive line in a long time. And at some point, we're going to have to consider that.
Mm-hmm. Yes, we are. But hopefully not, because hopefully all these guys hit and we're great. So we'll have to find out. Well, folks, that brings us to the end of this week's Two Old Bloggers. Darren, have you got any last words?
It was mentioned earlier, I guess we didn't talk about just one of my favorite topics again. Cam Dantzler got released by Washington this week, and it's just kind of strange with Dantzler. I don't know what's going on with him, but I get the feeling that I've always talked about how he seemed to get in the doghouse with Zimmer, even with the new coaching staff. And wow, I don't know if
if there's a backstory we haven't heard yet, or what it is. It's odd for sure, right, Aaron? You got that right. Somebody
mentioned we picked Sharif Floyd. That's correct, 2013. I missed it.
Yes, we did, and then the surgeon screwed that up. Who's the spotlight next week?
We're going to be going to Jay Ward, another LSU Tiger.
Another LSU Tiger. You betcha. Hey, this has been awesome. What do we say?
We say Darren will try to not screw up on defensive linemen that we picked and next week. And SKOL Vikings, baby.
Thanks for watching, everyone. SKOL Vikings! Like, subscribe, and ring the bell. And rate us on your favorite podcast aggregator. Darren and Dave, thank you for watching this episode of Two Old Bloggers. We look forward to seeing you on every show on the new Vikings First and SKOL. You can find our podcast as part of the Fans First Sports Network. Sports takes for the fan, from the fan. SKOL, everybody!